Recently, the talk that the US dollar is losing dominance to Chinese yuan has been spreading online. Don't be fooled, this is part propaganda and part of the push back against rising interest rates. The reality is the Chinese yuan is only around 2% of the global trade, while the US dollar make up 44%. The Chinese yuan ranked number 5 out of all the currencies used in global trade. Even though the share of the Chinese yuan in global trade has been growing, that growth is actually happening after a recent decline. The share of Chinese yuan used in Chinese good trade is not even as high as back in 2015. If the Chinese yuan were to surpass the US dollar, it should at least surpass its own historical record first.
As you may notice that I use a synthetic voice. That is because I struggle with English speaking. Anyway, I do my own research and write my own script. Please consider subscribing.
As I mentioned before, the talk is part propaganda, part some people's own self-interest. I am guessing the majority of you don't care about China and Russia and why they spread their propaganda, so let's first focus on why some people would want to push this conspiracy out of their own interest. One of the main arguments for why the US dollar is losing to the Chinese yuan is the rising interest rate. Some people hope that the spreading of this argument will force the Fed to pause raising the interest rate. The reason for that is the rising interest rate is seriously hurting some people. By now I am sure you must have heard of the collapsing of the Silicon Valley Bank and the First Republic Bank. A lot of small banks are also struggling. The detail about their fall is a complicated story for another day. The only thing you need to know is that all of this come down to the rising interest rates. Rising interest rate is also cooling down other markets such as real estate and the automobile. A lot of investors in those industries got hurt badly and lost a lot of money. But that actually is a good thing for the working class, the hardworking Americans that almost always got screwed by the economy. Those who got hurt are mostly the investors. The investors are losing money because the housing price is about to go down, the car price is about to go down, the food price is going down, all good things for the working class. Forget about the trickle-down economy. This is you taking back what is supposed to be yours directly from the rich. Just in last month, the price of eggs in my neighborhood is down by half. Finally. As for the investors, they enjoyed nearly 2 decades of low interest rate, got rich, and even richer in the pandemic. They got comfortable. They got greedy. When the Fed started raising rates and taking all that away, the investors panicked. The low interest rate is one of the main reasons why the things like the housing price has been rising much faster than the 20th century. They force working class into taking out low-interest loans to pay more and turn you into a slave of your debt. If you just look at historical record, you will notice that interest rate above 5% is totally normal in the 20th century. Yet the investor is whining very loud now when the Fed has barely raised the interest rate above 5%. In the last decade, as the interest rates remain lower than 5%, the investors enjoyed booming stock market while wages have barely moved. Among those benefited are a lot of retail investors in the stock market thanks to Robinhood. Now that the interest rate is back above 5%, the stock market is shaking with fear. A clear sign of the investors' fear is that the banking industry is pushing the Fed to stop raising interest rate. However, you need to understand that those people represent the interest of the investors of the banks, not the depositors. For the depositors, the working class of the US, your money is safely insured by the FDIC and has nothing to worry about. For the investors, they are about to lose a yacht. Those people have a way swinging the Congress, and you can clearly see that in recent statements from the Congress. Then there are also the foreign governments who are pushing the concern that rising interest rates are hurting the US dollar dominance. That is where China comes into play. Every foreign government has their own foreign currency reserves. Nearly 59% of that foreign currency reserve is US dollar. That is a lot of money. Most of the time, that money works exactly the same as the money in the US banks. Like the Silicon Valley banks, they got hurt by the rising interest rate. The rising interest rate is also attracting investors to move their US dollars from foreign countries back into the US. This is kind of like the bank run that brought down the Silicon Valley Bank. Just like the banks, those countries' foreign exchange reserves are forced to sell their US Treasury bills for cash at a loss. And just like the banks, those countries have no one to blame but themselves. They did not prepare for an interest raise. They messed up their economy, so money is leaving. I am not saying the US did great, just much better compared to the rest of the world. For example, while the inflation rate is about 5% in the US, too high, the inflation rate in Europe is at 7%. That is nothing compared to the UK, who are experiencing a 10% inflation rate. The only one that is doing well is the Japan, who is having an inflation rate of only 3.3%. That is why they are actually benefiting from the US raising the interest rate. That also means, even if holding the US dollar in their foreign reserve while the US is raising interest rate is hurting those countries, they have no better alternative. The majority of the world's economy is doing worse than the US. Shifting from US dollar to a currency from a country with worse economy would not be wise. You can also forget about the Chinese yuan replacing the US dollars. The economic situation in China is even worse than Europe. They are facing the extremely dangerous possibility of a deflation, which usually is a sign of recession. Then you have countries like Russia who want to spread the propaganda that the US is losing dominance in global trade. The US dollar dominance in the global trade is the main reason why the US financial sanctions on Russia works so well. They want the world to shift away from using US dollars so they can reduce the effect of US financial sanctions. They also want to convince the Americans that they are losing US dollar dominance because of the sanction, so they might lift the sanction. I know there are some people who don't believe in helping Ukraine. I talked about why helping Ukraine is important in my other video. That is not important for the topic today. What you need to know is that there are many arguments for lifting the sanctions, but it is definitely not to make Putin happy. So, the next time you read about news that the US dollar is losing dominance in global trade, you should really read it more carefully. For example, the news said that Argentina and Brazil are shifting to using Chinese yuan for global trade. What they didn't tell you is that they are actually buying Chinese goods using Chinese yuan. What they are doing is essentially reducing Chinese yuan in their foreign currency reserves. How is that shifting from US dollar to Chinese yuan? Same with India paying for Russian oil with Russian ruble. Russia got a lot of Russian rubles from the trade, but they can't get it out of India due to sanction. They are just sitting in banks in India rotting and doing nothing. No one else is willing to accept Russian ruble as payment except Russia. The devil is always in the details, and if you don't be careful, they will slowly chip away your confidence in the US dollar.